I was interviewed by Noah Reisman it's a long story. So at ACU because he was writing a history of trans in Australia,
Mhm.
and then I said I sort of, as an aside, mentioned I tend to just I've kept a lot of articles and things about trans. Anyway,
Yeah.
it turns out I've got about 4 or 5 filing cabinets of articles and things out of newspaper clippings and things, are from about the early 70s through to about 2010 or thereabouts. So I've been doing a lot less of it recently. And he said, "Could I have a look?" Anyway, when he saw it, he actually said, "Oh." he's professor of history. He said, "This is a historian's wet dream." Anyway, but I also happened to mention that I had a lot of photos which in many ways documented my transition, in that what I was doing was I was prior to transition I was trying things out photographically, often before I did them, sometimes as a rehearsal photo. And like that photo, that poster I sent to you as from Acme, which apparently Acme are going to print, which I'm a bit amazed about. Anyway, they that was a photo I was just rehearsing a little piece I was helping a friend out with, and but taking selfies back in those days meant setting up a camera on a tripod and putting the timer on. And so they're all shot on 35mm. So, I've now, and from about mid 70s, so prior to the 1970s, I only had very amateurish cameras. But then I got a Pentax Spotmatic F when I in the mid 70s, and took transparencies for about 10 years. And so basically we got a huge chunk of those scanned. And a lot of negatives and prints after that. So it's what she's interested in, the trans journey. So basically, sorry, I didn't make the connection. She was a research student of Noah's, who was looking at because she comes from a visual background, a film background, was looking at visual history, and so she's then got ACR grant to make I think it's only a 10-minute documentary, but basically, because I've taken so many, we can sort of basically animate still photos. I was equally good at humanities and sciences in early high school, but when I had to make that choice in year 11, which most high schools force you to make a choice between humanities, commerce, and science, whatever, I chose science because what I didn't like about the humanities is when you're writing an essay or something, even though I loved Shakespeare, you could, when you have to express opinions, you could give away things about yourself in subtext. I was really worried about people discovering the fact, because I was really incredibly transphobic back in those days, because I grew up in a very trans and homophobic society, and I had internalized a lot of that, so I was really scared of it. So I thought engineering is going to be easy because it's all about things and things not falling over and stuff like that. But what I very quickly discovered was how misogynist the engineers were, and I quit after a year and moved to science. But then I did a lot of student theatre and basically ended up I really wasn't coping psychologically and dropped out of uni, and was looking for work in theatre. And I just saw this ad for the ABC as a technical operator, and I went, television's a bit like theatre, and look, I'm sure I'll learn about television in 6 months, and then I'll go back to theatre. But 50 years later, there I am. I believe 1971. The fact that I've basically worked there 5 decades, which just doesn't make logical sense when I say it. But in that first, and I knocked back a couple of promotions and things, or moving more into some of the more creative areas, because I was just too stressed in the early days. For example, I was once offered a producer's job in comedy, ABC comedy, and I knocked it back because I really was. This is just prior to transition. I realised I was about to transition, and I really needed a really easy, stable job for transition.
Yeah.
And so in that first decade, I mean, I started off. In those days, there was no such thing as a media course at university or whatever, and basically it was pretty well all on the job training. So, I was a camera operator, a vision mixer, a boom operator, and then I started to train people in those things. That was the first year, and then vision. When we went to color, so I started in black and white TV. When we went to color, I then I started to well, again, continuing as a vision mixer and vision controller and lighting desk operator, and then I by the around then after around about 1980, I became a technical producer, who's basically it's really only an ABC thing, but it's the equivalent in the commercial world as a tech manager for outside broadcasts and things.
Okay.
And I and so I did a lot of great shows during, particularly I worked on the Gillies show, and I was the audio assistant on the very first episode of Countdown, and and I was on the very last studio episode of Countdown. I was the lighting director, and I had a lot of fun doing. I loved just have a lot of fun doing lighting, and some shows I really felt I could be incredibly creative on were things like the Doug Anthony All Stars, Das Kapital, and the Big Gig. The trouble is there was hardly any of that work around. It was all drifting away. And then I was the first lighting director on Recovery, which was a really cool thing to do. Yeah, it was great. We had the 20th anniversary recently, which was interesting. Everybody who worked on those first couple of years really had a great time and really remember it quite fondly. Yeah. And people like Paul Clark has really gone on to do amazing things. And the so it was an amazing sort of opportunity. And in a way, I was in television at the height of station television, whereas now almost everything is done in private production houses and things. Which what you're sort of suggesting before, I guess, is what you're saying is you actually have to make your own work, whereas what's happened with us, we used to have when I started, we have 3 studios and 2 outside broadcast bands running, and then we got up to 3 or 4 outside broadcast bands at one stage, as well as 3 studios, and they were pretty well fully crewed. We ran, but everything was sort of more manual in those days. Like news, for example, needed a crew of 14 to put it to air.
So did you do news as well?
We just worked in television in production operations, and so so for example, when you're a baby camera operator, you start off by dragging cables on Countdown, and then you or Adventure Island and Bellbird, and then when they thought you could sort of handle a camera, they moved you to Studio 33, where you did camera on the news and 7:30 report, and then they'd let you move back to Studio 30. Then when you got a bit better at that, then you could move to Studio 32 and got to do camera on the kids' education shows and things like that. And then after, and then you move. And the same happened with vision mixers and vision controllers. So we had an in-house progression, because we had really simple programs. Well, although news wasn't always that simple as a vision mixer, for example, but it was a different emphasis on news. You basically had to push all the right buttons at the right time and never make a mistake.
Yeah.
And so they often ask for sometimes quite repetitive, simpler things. Whereas in the big on Countdown, you might end up with multi-layer effects, but you didn't really do that on news. So it was just getting to know around the way around the desk. So when you and the same with lighting, even I honed my lighting skills on newsreaders, because I go, this one's got this one's got a wrinkle under here. What can I do about that? So I took the I took the like almost like 1930s portraiture lighting,
Oh,
school of this is how lighting is an art, And look, I had some good compliments at times, that's went away. But also, I would listen to, the writers and see one of the things I think too many thoughts at once. I worked really well with the Doug Anthony All Stars is because I went along to production meetings and I listened to what they wanted.
yeah.
And Paul actually would do little drawings for me, and so, and I go, oh yeah, okay, I'm getting it. And but then the EP said to me, I don't want Julie, I want really interesting lighting, but I don't want any lights in shot. And I went, okay, fuck. So the first thing I did, the first day in the studio, I put lights in shot, but I took the barn doors off so they didn't look like studio lights, and I basically said to him, I remember the first AD walked in and said, Julie, you've got lights in shot. So, he said, no lights in shot. I said, they're not lights. That's part of the spaceship.
Creative.
And he gave me a dirty look, but the EP never questioned me because it looked good.
Yeah.
And interestingly, after that first day shooting, all three Doug Anthonys came up and gave me a big hug.
Aw.
Because that was because I'd listened to them and got what they wanted. Another day, I could see the rigger. He was a really stocky guy coming to me with a bright red face, and I went, oh, fuck. And because I almost knew what he was going to say. Like, why the fuck are we doing this? What the fuck? And so I put my hand up and said, Bruce, his name was Bruce, stop. Right. He went, what? I said, Bruce, just because it's fucking stupid doesn't mean it won't happen. And the true techos were standing next to me at the time because I was talking to them, and they just started cacking themselves. And in fact, it became our motto. It got put up on the whiteboard as our motto. And then, just as how nerdy I am, I went out of my way. I translated into Latin to make it sound posher.
Unreal.
So,
right.
yeah, stultitia tanta est, ut non factum non fiat. What I also realised is my rigger had a real huge chip on his shoulder. And then it wasn't hard to work out why. A lot of the cameramen treated him like their slave and gave him a really, really hard time. In fact, I actually said to one, we had an acting senior cameraman at the time, and I said, I can't remember his name actually. I said, oh, look, I'm in charge of Bruce, because I realised he had no skills with Bruce at all. So I actually said, if you want Bruce to do anything, you've got to come to me. I'm Bruce's boss, not you.
Right.
And after a year, one of the production managers said to me, Julie, what have you done to Bruce? He's been really helpful. He's been, he's actually being nice. He's being helpful. He's happy. Yeah. And basically, it's that Taoist thing about leadership. You've got to respect the people you lead.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in terms of just like Anzac Day, I remember there was a thing where, for some reason, Bruce couldn't come to the recce for Anzac Day. And so, I took a lot of notes, but we had to build a lot of scaffolds. And so what I realised was, just Bruce and I went over, the two of us a couple of days later, and I said, instead of saying, Bruce, I want you to, because the previous guy would have said, Bruce, build a scaffold here. And he would have told him everything about it. And what I said to Bruce was, Bruce, we need a scaffold here. We think 18 feet. What do you think? So, see, to me, that is respecting his ability to build a scaffold.
Yeah.
And because I didn't order Bruce to build a scaffold. I said, Bruce, we need a scaffold.
Yeah.
And he knew that was his job.
Yeah.
But I was giving him some respect. But it also, and even though some people thought, one of the things which most people don't realise about me is I've actually got 6 brothers.
All right. Okay.
and I'm the eldest, so I was used to sort of being in charge of boys,
Yeah. Yeah.
and from that point of view, I don't. And what it came down to is I realised that, and the senior techo, I got talking to him one day, and I realised that he was describing a family situation where his older sister
Mm.
was organising all the family functions. And then I realised that's in a way I'd created my own archetype, and which was I'm the elder sister organising everything.
Yeah. Mm.
And so rather than, and this is how I organised, 20 or 30 blokes,
Yeah.
is that they got that I was the organiser, and I used language which respected their abilities. I also learned about life, I suppose, learned about life through working in TV. Is that, for example, when you're a vision mixer or a camera operator, you're actually part of the performance. In that, you have to actually push your. I guess to say vision mixing, because we did a lot of it back in those days. We very rarely recorded ISO cameras. It just wasn't done.
Right.
We would actually cut live. Everything was cut live. The fastest cutting I've ever done was on the Commonwealth Games when I had 10 cameras. And it was go cut, that sort of pace.
Wow.
Just and it was just incredibly, and it was quite high pressure, just sheer concentration for hours at a time. Most of the outside broadcasts are things like sport,
Right.
like AFL, hockey, whatever, Commonwealth Games, and most of those 10, for example, an AFL match for Channel 9 is about, they don't do it anymore. This was 21 cameras, 15 cameras for Channel 7 and 10 cameras for Channel 10. Yeah, different people had different budgets. And what ABC, of course, did it with 6 cameras normally. But the thing is, we were often, at this stage, I was in outside broadcasts. I got the job as OB supervisor for outside broadcast in Tasmania.
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, I meant that, and I tipped, and we did AFL for 7 and 10, and Foxtel as part of our remit, because they didn't have a van in Tassie as well. So we would do hire, ABC hire, would rent us out.
Yep.
So we did some of those much bigger OBs. So certainly when I started, there was so definitely women's work and men's work in television.
Yeah.
Less so in theatre. That's one of the things I liked about theatre. Theatre, there were a lot of producers, directors, set designers, lighting people, but not in television. Yeah. It was very, very sex segregated. And I was a bit surprised, actually. I was expecting television to be like theatre, which it wasn't, because a lot of the blokes had come from PMG, like at Techos, because and just around about the same time as I started, they had their very first female camera operators, but they only really ever got to do some of the simpler shows. But what I mean in terms of women's work, men, all the directors, producers, executive producers were men. I think all the floor managers were men. All the camera operators, the first female job allowed was a vision mixer. And of course wardrobe, production assistants, typists. Like in the newsroom, I think there's 1 or 2 cadet female journos, and nearly all the journos were male, and the women were typists. And what then happened on top of that was that as the genders did change, it still meant that wardrobe was paid a lot less than camera operator, because wardrobe was traditionally women's work and camera operator was men's work. Yeah. And it was really obvious to me that, I've made costumes, and it's, just camera isn't more difficult than making a costume. It was really obvious to me that, the reason, because we're like related to the public service, the cameramen in Studio 31 were all band 5, band 6, band 7, whereas the wardrobe people were band 3, band 4. And to me, the work was no more difficult. Women should have been up there as well, but it seemed to me the reason it was that way is because it was considered women's work.
Yeah. Oh, 100%.
Yeah. But gradually towards the late 70s is when we started to see more women coming into operation areas. But what tended to happen is they didn't enter the studios or outside broadcasts. In fact, when the first woman was sent out to outside broadcast as a videotape operator, they actually had to build a toilet for women.
Oh, wow.
In the 70s, women in operational areas, they tended to go into telecine or videotape, not the big operational jobs. So not the and it was quite unusual. The other thing which I felt I also had to do to an extent was is lead from the front. Like when we're wrapping up cables, I would because everybody else hated to do the power cables because they were that thick. I would do the power cable, even though I was probably one of the smallest people on the crew.
Yeah.
Because I'm what am I, 168ish.
Right.
So that's tall for a lot of women, but short for most men.
Yeah.
So quite in between.
Yeah.
It's to me. And look, and I got to do a bit of DOPing as well on drama, which was fun, and so basically, I've had a lot of fun in the industry.
So good.
And seen some big changes over decades. Look, and when I can say it that I started in 71, so that's 50 years ago. But it doesn't actually make emotional sense. It makes logic because the way memory doesn't quite work like that. You remember the last year really well, and you remember the last 10 years reasonably well, and the last 20 years a bit less well.
Yeah.
When you go back 50 years, you go. That's why photos are good, because you pull out the photos and go, oh yeah, I remember that day. About a year or so after I transitioned, because I was really obvious. So I was running around studios with a great big pole hitting lights and things. That's more a television thing than a film thing or a theatre thing, or directing people to do it. One of the young women who had just joined the ABC as a casual.
Yeah.
Basically said to me, how does a woman get into lighting? Look, and she knew my history though. So, I took it on board. And so I actually went and saw our training officer at the time in Melbourne. So I went and saw him and said, I'd like to run a lighting course for women. And I designed a lighting course. And what I also, realised that a lot of women didn't do sciences, for example, at school, and for example, and they didn't probably quite get the electrics needed to understand lighting. So I did a little bit of optics, a little bit of electrics, but I spent most of the time on talking to producers and talking to producers and delivering and coming up with a way of approaching a particular program. Mm-hmm. So and it was a 10-day course. So I got it, and we got a lot of AB and I've got ABC women from ABC Darwin, ABC Melbourne, ABC Adelaide, all came to Melbourne, and we booked a studio and a crew. Mm-hmm. So the first week was basically spent, just learning about lights and things, and the second week we had one day where we did I was in a drama group at the time, and I got 3 actors to come in and act a scene, and we did it like old-fashioned 3-camera style.
Yeah.
And they had to light it and do all the then we got a band in and another day, and then the third group we got in was a lutenist and 2 singers. So we were able to then combine that the director of those was Madeline Getson, who was at that stage like a floor manager who was wanting to be a director. So she got to train as a director as well.
Okay.
So that was a great little thing. That went 10 days. And basically, make a long story short, a couple of people on it were WIFT members.
Okay.
And they came to me and they were impressed by that. And they came to me and said, well, suggested I join WIFT for a start, which I did. But also, a year later, or maybe it was 2 years later, that they came to us with an idea where we did 3-way funding for a second one of those lighting courses, which was for more people. Mm-hmm. And it was external to the industry. So the deal was half the people on it would be ABC, the other half would be external people.
Right.
But we got funding from the AFI. So it was AFI, WIFT, ABC co-production, which was and I at that time and basically what I forget her name. She was an editor at the ABC. Anyway, she was on the WIFT committee at the time and basically suggested I nominate for the committee. But I only did 1 year. I actually really felt I couldn't do it really well enough to my with the time and issues I had at the time. So anyway, so I did the best I could for those periods.
Yeah.
Then I was really pleased to get those lighting courses for women up, and because another based on that, I can't remember how this connected. I was approached to do this. There was a group called the Woman. There's a group. It was actually a little support group for single women and it was actually called something like Single Women and Their Children.
Right.
And what they wanted to do as an empowerment thing is make a documentary. So they basically had spoken about the idea of telling, using storytelling as in filmmaking, with smallish amateurish cameras, to tell stories. And so they basically had a producer director who basically ran the course, and I came in for 1 day and I basically did the basics of lighting. My next big project, because I'm leaving the ABC at the end of this project, is I'm going to turn my PhD into a cabaret.
Oh, what? That's fantastic. I'd go and see that.
Oh, good. Yeah, and it's got the very, it's got the, look, I'm not going to use the PhD title because, which is a feminist post-transsexual autoethnography on challenging normative gender coercion. As far as media could tell at the time, I was the first trans person to run for a political party and be out about it. And so to that extent, I became the tabloid Democrat. But what happened initially was, so I ended up doing about 7 television, 25 radio, and about 40 press interviews.
Wow.
In a very, very short time. There was 1 day I did 7 interviews. And interestingly, it started off very slowly. Like I started off by doing interviews for the Gay and Lesbian Press. And then I got a call from the Northcote leader. I did that interview, which we chatted for about 45 minutes, and I'm going, this woman isn't going away. What's wrong with her? Hasn't she got enough already? Because it's just the Northcote leader. It's got anyway. Then she wouldn't go away. She wouldn't go away, and I went. And then she said, "Look, then she wasn't willing to mention the trans word."
Okay.
And she just had asked me about my politics and why I was running for parliament. And she just thought I would naturally go to being, about the whole trans thing. And because I didn't go anywhere near it, I just talked about Democrat policy and social justice and the environment and, all those sort of things. Anyway, because I'm a bit of an idealist. Anyway, and she said, "Oh, a friend of mine told me about you because he read about you in the Perth Gay Press."
Okay.
And I went, "Oh, you want to talk about the trans thing?" So we then did another 45 minutes about the trans thing. So I ended up with a front page thing, page 3, which is about all my politics, and page 9, which was about being trans.
Right.
And I thought, well, that was really interesting, the way she approached that, because the fact that I talked to her for so long about the politics before I got onto trans had convinced her about my politics. Anyway, I doubled the vote in Melbourne, in that Fatman. So I went from 4% to 8% and came in third. Now, but because Northcote Leader is part of the News Corp, 2 days later I was contacted by the Herald Sun, and then I got page 3 in the Herald Sun. And once I got page 3 in the Herald Sun, everybody in Australia noticed. I saw it as, part of my politics is now that I've actually done this, is to demythologize trans. So, so to an extent, if I had to give my cabaret and PhD a subtitle, it would be a trans demythology.